I always really liked Rosa's concept since the day she was released, but never really vibed with the builds she gravitated towards, mostly of those being ground shatter, as I don't really like the playstyle of it, and the lack of single target really disappoints me, personally. So, fast forward to now, I saw this build that I really liked the concept of, and decided to give it a try. So today, we'll be talking about Haunting Abomination Rosa, an auto-bomber build that behaves closer to a cast-on crit one. I'll be talking about gear, skills, hero memories and relics, and much more. Also, I'm on a journey to make a build for every single character available in Torchlight, so if you want to see more, check out the playlist on the corner right now, see all the ones I have covered already. And subscribe so you don't miss out on future ones. For now, let's get on with the build. I want to start by talking about the skills for this build, since these are very build defining, very unique, and we use a couple of very specific setups that are mandatory. So let's start with the use of the two medium gems that we run. The first one is linked to our Haunting Abomination gem, and it's going to be Activation Medium Instructions. This medium makes the skill automatically cast, as well as gaining a lot of additional damage per stack of instruction it has. We gain instructions in a very specific way that I'll cover in a little bit, but just know that we run that, and after the remaining support gems for our Haunting Abomination will be Ground Divide, Sped Up Formation, Tendon Slicer, and Critical Strike damage. All of these will serve the same purpose, to increase the amount of damage Haunting Abomination will deal. Our second skill will be Whirlwind, which will be linked firstly to our second activation medium, Critical Strike. This is where we get our stacks of instruction from. This makes so when our Whirlwind crits, it will send a number of instruction stacks to our main skill, granting it a massive boost in damage. These two gems make the whole build function and are necessary for the build to work as it does right now. After that, Whirlwind will also be linked to Harden, Critical Strike Increase, and Guard. All of these gems should be very self-explanatory. Crit Strike Increase just makes so we send more instructions to our main damage skill and therefore deal more damage. And the other two, Hardened and Guard, are here to provide us with added defensives. For our mobility skill, we run Blink, linked to quick mobility and nothing else. We also make use of Mana Boil. Our main skill is a spell, and so Mana Boil will provide us with a massive increase in damage. We link it to cost conversion, so it burns our life rather than our mana, as we don't run any mana regeneration. After that, we link it to Well Fought Battle for the added effect. In the same vein, we link it to Mania, also for the added effect that it provides. Finally, we run Ages of Fire, as it grants a massive increase to attack and spell block. Rosa specifically can transform all block into offensive stats, making it a very solid offensive and defensive skill that we can maintain 100% uptime on, with very minimal investment. This skill will be linked to Iron Fortification and Armor Infusion, both of those just to increase the effectiveness of the block that we gain here. For our auras, we run a triple defensive setup, making this build extremely tanky. These auras will be Steadfast, Energy Fortress, and Elemental Resistance. All of them will be linked to Selfishness or Amp and stand as one. Steadfast will also be linked to Seal Conversion to reserve it on our life instead. Our final aura will be Weapon Amplification and will also be linked to Selfishness, stand as one, and Aura Amp. For our gear, we run a very interesting but very specific setup, with a full set of legendary items, so let's talk over them. Starting from the top, we run Corrupted Marrow, preferably with a corrosion on the mod that grants us increased maximum amounts of terrors. The negative of nearly no terror recharge speed is then mitigated by our next piece, the Kingly Armored Chest. This piece sets your terror restoration speed to a fixed amount, on top of granting us 1 extra terror quantity and 1 main skill level. an all-around great piece that we can make even more powerful by hitting a couple of very strong corrosions. Our gloves will be the Ghost Slaughter gloves, granting us a nice amount of attack damage per fervor rating, and as you will see, we invest a lot into fervor effect, making this far more valuable than it initially looks. Our amulet will be the Illusory Ocean Silk, specifically the one with the subname Iron Rain. This will provide us with a lot of armor, a generous amount of added damage, as well as our curse of choice, Vulnerability. It also converts a lot of our erosion damage taken to physical, adding a nice layer of defense to our character. The boot slot will be Ralph's Footstep, a standard pick for fervor focused builds like ourselves, providing us a nice amount of movement speed, as well as scaling the effect of our fervor the longer it is active. If possible, this scaling mod should be corroded to grant us even a higher effect. Keep in mind, a bad roll of these boots can provide you with a very big reduction of uptime for fervor, so if you feel like your fervor is always falling off, make sure to check if you don't happen to have a bad roll of these with 90% minus duration of fervor. Our belt will be the legendary piece, and more. This belt has a lot of variation, so it can be difficult to look for a good one. With our exact setup, you need to have at least 7 positive resistance per legendary gear equipped to hit your resistance cap. That is of course already accounting for our elemental resistance aura. If you can't get one with that much resistance right away, that is fine. Just buy whatever you can and eventually upgrade it when possible. Some resistance is obviously better than none. If you really have no currency and can't afford any of these, the set piece belt from the first few maps is a good placeholder, especially if it has good resistance rolls. Our rings will be 2 chaotic endings. The perfect setup would run triple fervor effect rolls. However, they can cost silly amounts of currency, so my recommendation is looking for ones with a minimum 1 roll of fervor effect, and then a selection of gain fervor on crit, spell damage per focus blessing, and crit strike per agility blessing. Our final piece, and arguably the most important, will be the irreplaceable Varial Snicker, granting us a lot of spell damage, as well as a buff called Void Orbs. Each stack of these will add a massive amount of physical damage to our attacks and spells, and it's from here that most of our base damage will come. This piece is also fundamental to the build, and I wouldn't recommend attempting it until you can acquire it and equip it. Another important fact is that you get more orbs the more legendary gear you have, making it work very well with our setup. A corrosion on the Void Orb quantity mod will allow you to get all the way up to 12 stacks of this buff. Lastly, for candles, you should try to get either maximum Terra quantity or maximum Terra charge quantity. Those will be your 2 best mods. The full passive setup can be found in the builder in the description, as I will only cover the major nodes in each of the trees in detail. Our first tree will be God of War, a tree providing all around great amounts of damage as well as good amounts of block and defense. Our first major node will be Brutality, a very straightforward node granting us a lot of physical damage at the expense of elemental damage, which doesn't have any meaning to us. The second node on this tree will be Automatic Upgrade, giving us a lot of spell and attack block if we blocked recently. Keep in mind that we are also getting Endless Fervor here, but from a pedigree of the gods, so if you don't have access to that yet, you should go with Endless Fervor instead. Our next tree will be Shadow Dancer, and our first node will be Continuum. A rarely seen node, but one that synergizes greatly with our build. Every time you Whirlwind crits, we will gain a massive amount of spell crit for our Terra skill, an easily maintained buff that will grant us a lot of damage. The second node on this tree will be Hair Trigger, granting us a lot of additional damage for trigger skills, scaling with our fervor effect. A no-brainer option here, given that none of the other possibilities hold any relevancy for us. Our final tree will be, with no surprise, Ranger, as is the go-to tree for any build that heavily focuses on fervor and crit. The first major node will be Fluke, granting us the lucky property on our crits. Essentially, it rolls twice every time you do damage and picks the higher of the two. The second node here will be Impending, granting us a stacking damage taken debuff for the enemies that are within 10 meters of us. Since the build plays in melee, this should have a very easy time being applied to all our enemies that survive for the necessary duration. For your slates, as I said, we run an endless fervor pedigree of the gods. After that, look for things that provide you with crit damage per fervor, movement speed per fervor, block ratio, and defenses. Our hero trait will be a big part of our damage, so let's get right into it. Our level 25 and 60 are non-optional and grant us a lot of radius to the Holy Illumination, a generous amount of life, an energy shield regen scaling with our Murderer's Intent, and a lot of damage if we blocked recently, on top of an already big damage increase against enemies inside the Holy Domain. Our level 45 will be Precise Steamroll, granting us a reduction to our skill area, but also a lot of additional damage when we are inside the Holy Domain ourselves. The level 75 option, Desperation, grants us once again a lot of damage against enemies inside the Holy Domain, in particularly scaling with our Murderer's Intent. On top of that, the same scaling will also apply to all unit attack and cast speed. That includes yourself, but also your enemies, so that is important to keep in mind. Due to our heavy investment in defensives, this should not feel like a detriment, and instead provide us with all the buffs that we need for things like blocking recently or taking damage recently. At level 90, we pick our final point. In this case, it will be Crush, a node that grants us a lot of maximum Murderer's Intent based on our block ratio. For the relic, you need to look for the one with the mod that says, for every 5 Murderer's Intent, all enemies inside the Holy Domain take additional damage until the domain closes. This mod is single-handedly, in my current setup, giving me over 80% additional damage, and it's a massive increase to all of our damage. The second mod here can be anything of value, but block ratio will probably be your best bet, although quite expensive. On your memories, you want maximum Murderer's Intent increases on all of them, preferably as high as you can get. The second mod can be a lot of things, but the two best will either be block ratio or bosses take additional damage inside the Holy Domain. You will also get a support gem slot for a Holy Domain. None of the options here really have any value, and the one thing you can look to get is an activation medium of Perpetual Motion. This will make sure that the Holy Domain will automatically trigger. However, this is very expensive and should be treated as a luxury buy. And that is the build. If you have any questions or suggestions, drop them in the comments below. Also, let me know what characters you want to see in this series next. Subscribe to the channel, and I'll see you all later. Bye bye.